It has been a season from hell for the Philadelphia 76ers, who head into the NBA All-Star game on a 5-game losing skid and with their outlook looking as pessimistic as it has all season. With Joel Embiid and Paul George's injury issues popping to the forefront and Tyrese Maxey joining him, maybe it is officially time to turn our attention to next season. I want to break down why tanking is officially back in the conversation for what is the best direction for the Sixers team, as a familiar friend of Tankathon.com has popped back into one of the frequent pages on my browser here. And after the Nets just beat the 76ers, Phillies moved back into their top 6 protected range, in which otherwise would go to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And taking a peek at this, the Sixers and Nets now tied for the 6th worst record in the NBA there. Now, granted, when we've had this conversation as a whole, sort of my logic here and why I've been against this tanking game plan for this point is I think when looking objectively around the league, it was hard for me to believe that the Sixers team could be worse than some of these bad teams out there. I mean, even looking against the teams that are beyond them in the standings, the Toronto Raptors, the Charlotte Hornets, the Utah Jazz, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Washington Wizards. This is not even considering teams like the Portland Trailblazers. There's a lot of bad basketball teams in the NBA. Shout out the Trailblazers, have been playing better lately. But my point being here is my outlook was when you have a team with Joel Embiid on it, regardless of how available he will be, when you have Paul George, when you have Tyrese Maxey, when you have guys like Kelly Oubre, like Gershon Yabusele, you simply should not be in the bottom tier of the NBA. At worst, my perception was this team probably ends in the play-in tournament. That to me was the floor of what this season has become, but boy has it been so much worse than that. And that puts this team in a really difficult spot for both the short and long-term outlook from here. For the short term, that they have a brief pause in this NBA season as the All-Star break takes over, but unfortunately for everyone involved here, the season does pick up on the other side. Now, when looking ahead, the larger part of this conversation and the other part why I've been against this, it is the chances of keeping the Sixers pick. Because while in theory it's great to have a chance at Cooper Flagg or a chance at Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper or any of these top tier talents, that this is a fairly loaded draft class here. The worst case scenario for me would be for the Sixers team to go this route, get to the end of the season, and be rewarded of nothing. Now, to take a look at the exact percentages here, that if they were one of the top 2 worst teams in the league, you have a 100% chance of keeping the pick. And for reference here, this being from the Philly Voice here, this is not the percentage to get the 1 pick. This is the percentage to purely keep the draft pick, meaning it being in those top 6 draft picks, which is the only condition in which the Sixers do keep it. If it is outside of those top 6 draft picks, it gets added to the Oklahoma City Thunder like they need another draft pick at this stage of the game. But to continue on, if they were to finish with the 3rd worst record, they have a 93% chance of keeping the pick. 4th worst, 81.8%. 5th worst, 64%. And 6th worst, where they now currently sit, a 45.8% chance. Now, the tough part about threading this needle is I still don't see a world in which the Sixers can get dropped to that significantly worse than a lot of these teams. They're not going to be worse than the Washington Wizards. Unfortunately, they just will not if this is the direction that they will go. But the reality is, what has changed my perception of this is 45% a greater chance of them keeping their draft pick and adding a talent in the long term, a piece to continue to build around? Or is the chance of them getting in the play-in tournament, winning the play-in tournament, and then making some noise in the playoffs, is that higher than a 45% chance? At this point in the season, I don't know how you can look me in the eye and say that that is the direction to go. The reality is, I think rolling the dice and getting whatever draft pick that you can get or pray for and hoping for a little bit of lottery luck is probably a safer bet than believing this team can string together any chance of consecutive successful basketball on the floor here. And this also is a long-term discussion here because this team was built to be a multi-year contender. That to take a look at the multi-year breakdown, we've constantly heard the conversations from Joel Embiid about building continuity. Well, that was the game plan as you gave Joel Embiid his extension, gave Paul George his max contract, and rewarded Tyrese Maxey with his max contract as well. All those guys are on the books for, at a minimum, 3 more seasons, with the reality of it really being a minimum of 4 more seasons, with that first kind of deadline there being Paul George's player option here. Now, granted, this season has gone off the rails for a variety of reasons. But if you were to pin me down and really ask why, it is something that we don't fully know. Is it Joel Embiid that just has not been present, just has not been active, has not been himself, has not been involved enough in the team? That is certainly a fair conclusion to come to here. That I think we've heard enough whispers behind the scenes, the little reports, the locker room stuff that comes out, the just fact that he's played 14 games this season. And by the way, to add to that as a whole, that he sounds like he believes he needs another surgery. As we got this on the ESPN broadcast the other day from Lisa Salter saying, quote, "I asked Joel Embiid how that left knee feels, and he gave a really long pause and just says, 'It is what it is,' he said. to still be talking about it and dealing with it almost a full year after when the injury first occurred, it's been frustrating and the most difficult thing that he's ever had to go through in his career. He said that he thinks it will likely take another surgery and a long recovery period, something he didn't have after the initial injury last February. Now, for this particular fact here, whatever is going on, if Joel Embiid needs surgery to get back to 100%, it should have happened months ago. That there is zero reason for, at this stage in the game, at this point in the season, and where the Sixers stand in the standings, for him to be battling through anything right now. This is a perfect excuse to shut him down and go down this tank route. Now, for Paul George specifically, he is clearly bothered by this pinky injury. We're coming off a game against the Brooklyn Nets in which he scored 2 points, attempted 7 field goal attempts. That's embarrassing stuff for a $50 million player there. That is embarrassing stuff for a dude that's been to 10 All-Star games and has done everything that he has done in his career. That just can never happen. And for Tyrese Maxey, he missed the Nets game with an injury as well. The night before was embarrassing stuff. 5 points against the Toronto Raptors. He has been held to 5 or fewer points 4 total times in the past 4 seasons since his rookie year. This is the fewest amount of points he was held to since against the Boston Celtics in April of 2023. That kind of stuff just cannot happen there. So everyone has to have that hard look internally. And the fact of the matter, the hard part about all this is say this is the direction that happens. This season goes entirely off the rails, as it basically already is. Somebody has to catch the fall here. So who do you place the blame on? That you just made all these long-term investments. Is it the guy who handed out those deals and Daryl Morey himself? To be fair to Daryl, I mean, I get it. It's been ugly. I still feel like he threaded a needle in a way that was incredibly impressive. Adding Paul George. You just don't see max guys or max contracts switch sides in the NBA in the way that happened there. Now, granted, what does that tell us? It seems to me there was a reason for that. Is that on Daryl for not doing his due diligence there? I'm not going to be the guy to rewrite history and say I was against the Paul George signing. I haven't been from the very beginning. I saw the vision. It just has not come together. Is it Joel? Is that the fall guy? Have we finally hit the breaking point of the Joel Embiid era in Philadelphia? That no longer is this a guy who is invested in winning at the level that needs to be the case for a star. I think there's a world where that is the case. Nick Nurse here cannot be resolved the full blame. And I would say what has frustrated me the most about Nick Nurse, in general, I mean, they should simply be better than they are. I think he's been way worse at kind of the optics of being a head coach than actually being a head coach. The stuff like speaking to the media, stuff like after that matchup with the Brooklyn Nets, where Nick Nurse praised Paul George's effort and defensive impact, praising his plus-minus of +8, but also said his performance is not what you want to see offensively. I don't want to see any sort of praise. If you lost to the Brooklyn Nets, the 5th worst team in the league at that point, with a guy that just dropped 2 points and cashed way more than that in his time on the floor. So I don't need to hear that from Nick Nurse. I also, to be completely fair to some of the past Sixers coaches right here, if Doc Rivers is the head coach right now, do you think the Sixers have a worse record than they currently do? Because I don't. In fact, I would argue I think it's significantly better. A couple games better at the minimum there. This is not me saying that I want Doc Rivers back. I don't think the Sixers could ever win a championship with Doc Rivers as their head coach. But the point being here, that there's other guys that could be doing a better job than Nick Nurse has this season. That is just the facts. That is just the reality. Now, I've also talked plenty about head coaches, how they're the floor raisers and ceiling raisers. That I think Doc Rivers is a very good floor raising head coach. That you give him some very minimized talent, he's going to win you more games than he probably should. You give him top end talent, I don't think there is necessarily that level that he can unlock. For Nick Nurse, he has a championship ring on his finger. He has unlocked that top level. But if we also want to be fair here, was that a little bit more about Kawhi Leonard going on one of the most impressive individual stretches of basketball ever than anything that Nick Nurse did. That's a fair conclusion as well. So for Nick Nurse specifically, I also think he kind of sick of this. That he's been dealt the worst hand of cards that you possibly could ask for as a head coach, but he's also had zero clue with what to do. How many to trade him? What is my move here? Do I double down? Do I check? Do I fold this round? There hasn't been any of those sort of analysis or decision making for Nick Nurse. Now for the Sixers as a whole, I think the real reality of the season, you basically kind of let the cards fall as they may here. That the odds are still not in their favor of actually landing this draft pick. I still don't think there's a likely chance of them climbing much lower this in the standings. But what I do think the action steps that this organization can take, you shut Joel Embiid down right now. Before the end of the All-Star break, there should be a Shams report saying that Joel Embiid is out for the rest of the season. For Paul George, shut him down probably the rest of the season as well. And for Maxey specifically, if there is an issue with that knee, if it is more than a contusion and he did not remotely look like himself in that final game before he played and then was ruled out today, shut him down too, man. There is no reason for these guys to be playing through things at this point. I also think it's a little bit soft to each of those guys, primarily Paul George and Joel Embiid right now, that you basically get bailed out and get to chill the rest of the season. I think you kind of should have to be miserable and play on the floor like Kelly Oubre does every night, like Quentin Grimes is going to do the rest of the season, like Gershon Yabusele has from start to finish this season. There's a part of me that feels that way as well. But the reality is, if we are going to do what is best for the Sixers organization, I think that does mean taking a step back, and hopefully you can add another piece in the near future. I did not think the season could get this bad, but this is the stage that we are at. They will have a quick unplug for the NBA All-Star Weekend, and ultimately we will see what version of this Sixers team returns on the other side. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. This is the first time that I feel like I've logically landed on the tank approach. I've been pretty against it from start to finish this season for a lot of the reasons that I still explain, with just sort of the odds not feeling like they would be in the Sixers' favor. And while they're still not, my chances of them actually making any sort of noise have really simmered down to below whatever those chances of a draft pick are. So let me know if you were with me in the comments. Drop your thoughts on who is most to blame for this season as a whole. Appreciate each and every one of you guys rocking with me right here on Sixers Digest, and we'll be back talking with you next time. Peace.